following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
So when I saw the graph has an interface that any web developer can just work on it. Like if I just get a web developer who hasn't even worked with crypto at all, they come in, they just plug into some of the subgraph using GraphQL, they can get a web app up and running instantly. So I thought that was a real game changer because it really opens up all the use cases for developers to come in to just build something on top of it and see things happening.
GRTiQ podcast.
We're like astronauts floating in a space of time.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with TM Lee, co-founder and CEO of CoinGecko, the world's largest independent cryptocurrency data aggregator, with over 6,000 different crypto assets tracked across more than 400 exchanges worldwide. CoinGecko has become the go-to source for individuals interested in learning more about cryptocurrencies and collecting important data. Along with his partner Bobby Ong, TM co-founded CoinGecko with the mission to democratize the access of crypto data and empower users with actionable insights. My conversation with TM is incredible. We talk about his entry into crypto, his remarkable entrepreneurial journey, the original idea behind CoinGecko, and then we shift the discussion to the graph, how CoinGecko uses it, how it enables developers to get a quick start into the crypto space, along with his long-term vision for the graph and Web3. We end the discussion with a brilliant insight from TM related to what the next big thing might be in the crypto space. We started the conversation talking about TM's professional and educational background.
So myself, I have a technical background. So I used to study computer science in Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. So my background has always been related to software programming, and I actually loved programming since the teenage years. So started out picking up web development somehow by chance once I was inspired by the Web 2.0 movement, and then just started coding for fun. And eventually got a formal education in computer science to sort of solidify that as well. And when in college, I was just tinkering with side projects, building web apps, building those web stuff with JavaScript just for fun. I didn't really hear about crypto until much later on after I graduated from school. Although Bitcoin popped up quite a few times while I was studying in college, but never had the chance to really dive deep into it. I just glanced through it, never thought it would be something huge. But later on, after much more exposure in life, I started to digest it further and got further into the rabbit hole. But that kind of helped me understood why crypto kind of worked as well with the technical background.
What were your first impressions when you heard about Bitcoin? Were you intrigued by it or were you skeptical?
Yeah, so the first time I saw it when I was in college, I think there were a couple of negative vibes around it. It was used for various purposes, and then people got hacked, people got scammed, and those kind of things. So I just sort of brushed it off. Didn't really take the time to learn it through. But then later on, after I graduated from school, and then I got a job, and sometime in 2013, I just relooked it again one more time because I had a little bit of knowledge about finance already at the time because of some researchers and some of the projects that I worked on. And combine that with the technical knowledge I got, I just took another chance to read through the white paper and really see what are the problems that it's trying to solve. And that got me convinced that it's a possible new form of money. Also at the time, it really triggered because I was trying to build a startup back in Malaysia. I wanted to do a project, a SaaS project that requires us to process credit cards and payments. And there was no Stripe or Braintree in Malaysia. So I had to use a local payment provider. And they require me to have $500,000 in the bank account to even start the paperwork, right? So I don't have that kind of money, and I wanted to just experiment with this SaaS project, and I just need a payment provider to get this going. So after I got that problem, I wasn't able to proceed too much with the project. And then when I found out about Bitcoin and I realized I could charge users from all around the world without, succumbing to a legacy payment processing system. I thought that was like a game changer. And then that's where it's sort of like built up on top of that curiosity.
So you said you did some research on Bitcoin, you read the white paper, and you started to appreciate some of the problems that it could solve. You mentioned one there, right? It lowers the barrier of payments and things. What other problems intrigued you that you thought Bitcoin could solve?
Yeah, I think at the same time, it was 2013. I got a job and I made some money for my salary, and I was looking for places to invest my savings, right? And over time, like I just look at all the assets that are available out there. And in my research, I think I did find about, people talking about precious metal. At that time, I didn't understand like why people invest in gold and silver. Like these are assets that are not income generating. They're just there, sitting in your vault doing nothing. I'm just trying to find out what's the motivation for that. So after I learned through the history of money, like how money has evolved from rocks and then to gold and then to fiat currency. So going through the entire history about money to understand why people invest in gold in the first place got me to segue into Bitcoin later on as potentially the new evolution of money. So I think combination of this combined with the technical side of things, which is wanting to do a payment processor, sort of like got me to further validate that this is potentially something that could be big. Back in 2013, 2014, when it was really a niche thing that I couldn't even find people who are excited about crypto or Bitcoin. It was really hard. I had to go to a meetup with like 20, 30 people who are like-minded just to brainstorm ideas. Compared to what it is right now, you got conferences, you got people talking about Twitter. It was really, really different back then to find people who resonate with you.
Well, you're joining me from Malaysia, as you referenced just a moment ago. I'm always curious to ask guests of the podcast what the attitudes and opinions of the people where they live are towards crypto and Bitcoin. How would you characterize the attitudes and opinions of the people of Malaysia?
Yeah, I think in the grand scheme of things, it follows through the same adoption curve. Like there's early adopters, there's the late adopters, and then there is the laggards, right? So I think even back in 2013, 2014, we were able to find like a dozen of people who are interested in crypto. They are there for mining. They saw opportunity in mining operations and stuff like that. So I think in the early days, it's always been a very niche type group, like bunch of hackers, bunch of nerds who are interested in this. But I think over the years, things have changed quite a bit. Like we have our Securities Commission that have issued licenses for exchanges to operate legally, and also licenses to conduct like initial coin offerings and stuff like that. So I guess like the regulators sort of understand what this space is about and what it could do for the country, and they want to put things in control so that they can take advantage of this growing space. Largely, the late adopters are also like, could be people who don't really understand the space. So I think technically you see that in Asia, we tend to be much slower in terms of adoption. But I think because of crypto and we have access to internet right now, the pace of adoption is much faster compared to like when you look at Web 2.0 days, Asia is always like 2 to 3 years behind in regards to what's happening in the States. But right now, the adoption is much faster as well.
You and I are speaking, TM, because you're co-founder of CoinGecko, which is a name that most of my listeners of the podcast are going to recognize. For the one or two listeners that may not know what CoinGecko is, can you tell us what CoinGecko is?
Sure. So CoinGecko is basically a cryptocurrency data aggregator. So what we do is we track market data like prices, volume, market capitalization for almost all the cryptocurrencies that are out there. So we basically want to become the front page of cryptocurrency, where if you want to get any kind of information with the space, head over to CoinGecko. So that's what we really aspire to become. I mean, it didn't start off that way. Like it started off as a very different product. But over time, we have sort of like shaped up the vision and the purpose of the product in such a way that we think that there's going to be millions of tokens in the next like 5 to 10 years in the form of a non-fungible token or a fungible token. And I think where CoinGecko is that we want to be the one that organizes and index all this information such that people can make sense of it. We look at it like a couple of years ago, it was very difficult to get all this information about like market capitalization and where to trade them for all the cryptocurrencies that people are issuing every day. So we're seeing like an increase of 10-fold or 100-fold of number of tokens being issued compared to a year or two ago. So this space is definitely needs a way for us to aggregate and index all of it so that people can understand this information.
Well, you're very humble. Obviously, most of the listeners know CoinGecko is one of the most important and well-recognized websites and platforms in the crypto space. When you look at the data on the web views and the users of what you're doing at CoinGecko, again, it's really remarkable. And so I'm really intrigued what you said there about what it is today. Isn't it exactly what you started off to do? So what was the original idea?
Yeah, so I think the original idea was basically was a side project between myself and my co-founder, Bobby. And at the time, we were really interested in crypto and we just wanted to get involved in the space, but we don't know exactly what we want to build. So I think at that time, one of the popular things to build was like an exchange, right? 2013, 2014, everybody wanted to build an exchange. That's where most of the traction is. But we decided to do something that's a little bit different, that is something that we can play to our strength, because we are not very good with dealing with regulations and getting a bank account, which is what exchange have to do when they operate as a business. So for us, we go into the data side of things. We saw there is a missing gap in terms of tracking all the sub-metrics of a cryptocurrency, right? So I think at that time there were maybe like 50 to 100 coins, rather than now there's like more than over like 10,000 coins. At the time, again, people still look at prices and stuff like that, but we think that sub-metrics like how much developer traction, like how much contribution a developer is making to a crypto project, how much social metric, like how many people are talking about this particular project, how many people are discussing and creating a community group around this project. Those are metrics that people are not paying attention to, and we wanted to track this number to put a score to all those coins. So that's where we saw like Dogecoin, a coin that doesn't have that much different in terms of technical innovation compared to Litecoin or Bitcoin, but it has a huge social following that sort of like gives it some sort of a value. And then you look at other coins like, say, Monero or those piracy coins at the time, they had some new technical innovation with regards to how mining works, how privacy is preserved. But the social following is a little bit of a different kind of audience, right? So I think that was some of the things that we saw, like different crypto projects, similar, but they have different strengths. And we wanted to quantify them in terms of numbers. So that was the initial version of CoinGecko. We really wanted to focus on those niche. It caught a little bit of attention from some researchers in different like universities and college to look into this metric. And then over time, we thought this could be a metric that people want to rely on. But as the space continued to grow, no two different cryptocurrencies are the same. Like in the past, most of the coins are issued using proof of work. Like miners have to mine this coin, but later on you got coins that are just minted straight up from a smart contract. So a lot of these things makes it very difficult for us to just compare these coins just based on social metric and developer metric. And that's where we started to deviate and, reshape the product to see like, what is it that people want to look at when it comes to understanding what a crypto really is.
So you mentioned when you started, there were only, maybe 50 to 100 coins, and now there's, over 10,000. I would love to ask a guy like you this question, which is, all this growth, is this a sign of saturation? Is this a sign of explosive opportunity or something in between? How do you interpret all this growth?
Yeah, I guess on one part, the market moves in cycles as well. So I think I've been through like 3 bear markets already. So in a way, you could say that, yes, every time when there's an increase in number of coins in the market, it is an explosive, but then there's also an incoming potentially correction that will come in and saturate the space, if you will. But what's interesting with the current market sentiment is that it is intersecting beyond more industries than it used to. Like NFTs, people are starting to be able to relate to it. It goes into social, it goes into creative economy, and then you got your typical fungible tokens that goes into DeFi and figure out ways to govern the protocol, incentivize individuals. So it's much more different than the previous bear market, which was largely related to just fundraising and a lot of sort of like overpromised projects at the time. So I think it goes in both ways, the double-edged sword kind of thing. It is definitely an indicator of a growing market, a growing interest, but that also means that you got to be careful with what to come next.
Which is why CoinGecko is such a wonderful resource. And so for any listener out there that really wants to learn more about all the coins and learn more about the project, CoinGecko is the resource you need to visit. TM, one of the things I loved about your story and the founding of CoinGecko in doing research for this is at its heart, it's an entrepreneurial story, right? This was from the sense of it, a little bit of a side hustle, you and Bobby working on something on the side. How do you think being an entrepreneur in the crypto space is different than being an entrepreneur outside of crypto?
Yeah, I think I speak from our experience. I think if you ask someone who is doing a entrepreneurship in crypto now, today, and is starting off today, the experience may be a little bit different. But I think for myself and for us back in 2014 when we did CoinGecko, I think it was really, really difficult. Like I think number one was when we did this, like people don't really understand what we're doing in the first place, especially for the mainstream tech or the mainstream finance, which is, where all the bigger market is at. So when we did this, we told people about, crypto potentially become a big thing, and we are just building the foundation and the infra layer to understand things. They don't really resonate with it. So that was very difficult, right? So when we speak to some investors locally here in Southeast Asia, for example, we didn't really actively raise, but we're just sharing about what we're doing. They didn't really understand like what we're trying to do. And that sort of like makes it, are we crazy ourselves, or like are we on the wrong track? That sort of thing. So that's like one part of it, right? Second is also like the group of people that we want to find to help us with things is also much more difficult, right? So say for instance, getting a software engineer to help us with certain, modules that we need to build, or getting writers to write content for us. It was very difficult to find people who understand crypto so that they can contribute to the early stage of building up all these content and resources. So all these things come from ourselves, and also looking out for context within the crypto niche by itself. So it's a very niche play, but I think it's also good because when it was niche, it is much easier for us to get our product in front of the audience. So like, say for instance, people want to look for submetrics for developer or social score for crypto. We know where the audience are, and we know how to go to them and market to them, right? And then there are a lot of interesting things that you could do as well with crypto space that you can't do in conventional startup. Like we could do campaigns like, I remember back when Dogecoin was new and there's a big community there. We actually went in there and just say, hey, why don't you just check out our website, give us your feedback, give us a suggestion, and then we'll just tip you in Doge, right? So at the time, the tipping culture was really, really strong. You can just micro tip someone quite easily. And we get a lot of like followings and a lot of suggestions that we then inbuild back to the website as well. So I think these are like, some of the fun experience, I would say, when it was a niche, and that kind of helped us get to a certain stage. But I think today, in terms of differences, I'll probably say in regards to maybe like same problem as well, but maybe not so much. But then the new problems that you're facing is like regulation. You got a huge competition compared to then. Lots of people are already paying attention to crypto as a space that will potentially grow. So you really have to do a lot more to stand out and come up with a great idea.
So as somebody who started off really early on and, like you said, had the real benefit of a different market than presently exists, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice, really early on, knowing what you know now, what would be that piece of advice to that young entrepreneur just getting started?
Yeah, I think if I have the chance to go back, I would just tell my younger self to like just go all in. So, we started CoinGecko as a side project, and I think we lost, some market share, or maybe there were a lot of more things that we could do if we just focused 100%. But we didn't know that, right? We thought like Bitcoin would be big like 10 or 20 or 15 years later, but it came much more sooner than that. So if we were to double down, then I think things would have been much more different. But then again, on hindsight, I think what has laid out for us works for us best, and so far no regrets.
Well, I don't blame you. You've been immensely successful, and the future of CoinGecko is so bright. What is your long-term vision for CoinGecko? You've already mentioned that it kind of evolved from an early idea of what you wanted to do. What's the long-term vision presently for it?
I would say that the vision, as I mentioned earlier, is that we see a world that's going to be millions of tokens being created in all kinds of forms, representing all kinds of assets. Digital assets, even real-world assets as well will be tokenized. Everything that can be tokenized will be tokenized. We want to build the foundation or the infrastructure or the front end for users to get all this kind of information for any sort of tokens out there. People are still trying to figure out the space, like what metric really matters, or what fundamental really matters in all these token assets. How do I get the most transparent information? How do I get, just raw literature about what this token really means? So all these things need to be figured out, and how can they scale up to 1 million tokens? Like, yes, you can do it for a couple of 100 to 1,000 tokens. But once you scale it out across different chains, across different segments of, different tokens that are used for different form of use cases, it starts to get much more difficult, and we want to build that infrastructure towards getting there. The product will definitely look different, or we may need to launch new secondary or tertiary product to support this goal. But I would say that that's the future that we're seeing, and we're just building the rails towards getting there.
For visitors that go to CoinGecko's website and use the service, they're going to see some important ideology on the website that I think would be important to kind of touch on for a second here. And one of those things that I believe you use as a positioning statement is the independence of CoinGecko. Can you kind of explain what that is and why that's important?
Yeah, so I think that's really important to us. Number one is because all this while we haven't been taking any external funding. Like everything has been bootstrapped from day one, and we just reinvest the profit and run it to today. So we thought that was like a very important aspect of the business right now that we wanted to highlight, because there's no external stakeholders like influencing any of the things that we're doing, right? In terms of the way coins are being ranked, or even the security supply and stuff like that. And also looking at the competitive space, right? Some of the products that we're doing something quite similar to what we do are owned by, say, an exchange, or owned by or invested by a bunch of entities that may have a different interest, I would say. So that's sort of like the direction that we want to angle it, right? Like we want to index everything in the space, doesn't matter what it is, and provide the most accurate information as we can based on what we can verify. And that's where the tagline is going, right? Democratizing the access to data, not just in terms of the number of coins or the information that you see, but also in terms of access, right? So we have an API that is publicly available that gives you access to almost everything that you see on the website, that can be plugged into your dApps, your apps, and what have you. And that was also the driving force to why we created the API at that time. I think this was in 2019 or so, or 2018. We saw a gap in terms of developer coming to the space and then needing to pay for data to power their apps, even though it's just an experimental app for them to test something out. So we thought, like, if you give it up for free, then you can go ahead and test your app. And if it takes off, then the space will get better for everyone, including us ourselves. So we thought it would be a net benefit for everyone. And we thought like this would be a good way to launch the API as well. And until today, we still have a public free API that we subsidize and give it out to developers to play with it.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ. Thank you for listening to this podcast and for supporting this project, especially those of you who have taken the time to leave a review, rate the podcast, or share an episode on social media. The GRTiQ podcast shines a light on the people working to build the graph, and each week we get to meet a new member of the graph community to hear their story, to get a fresh perspective, and hopefully to learn something new. But the truth about the graph is that it's really about the countless stories happening every single day all across the world, including your story, that will make the difference in the success and evolution of the graph, and ultimately, Web3. You get to write your own story, so if you have the ambition to help build the graph, then take initiative and get involved. Join the Graph's Discord, start reading and contributing to posts in the Graph's forum, join the Graph's Telegram and Reddit channels, and look for ways to make a contribution. They're out there. If I can do it, so can you.
Thank you for your support. Roger that.
That idea is really part of the ethos of Web3, right? This democratization of data and access to data. So maybe different from some of your competitors and other people in the space, it seems to me that CoinGecko has really adopted the ethos of a Web3 world. Is that how you guys feel about it?
Yeah, that's definitely how I feel about it, at least back in 2019, since 2019, right? I always thought that, decentralized exchanges, having the ownership of your own keys and making sure data is openly accessible should be the way to go in this space. And I'm glad it really did happen when DeFi took off. Everyone sort of like, I think in the early stage, I was like, will people actually really figure out how to use MetaMask? Will actually people figure out how to use a DeFi product to do swaps and stuff like that? And I'm glad that the market has actually picked up and gotten efficient enough that to a point that people are willing to learn to take advantage of the good things that you can get for using a DeFi product. So I think at that time I was quite afraid that it wouldn't happen, but glad that it is. And even for us, when we run the company, we also try to stay on this side of thing, that decentralization is always something that we root for.
In addition to really having the ethos of Web3 and DeFi, in addition to having this really great independence, you also have some incredible capabilities. And I'd love to ask you questions about that. So first of all, CoinGecko is well recognized for being able to quickly and efficiently add new tokens to the platform and begin pulling in data and important metrics. I'm not asking for the secret sauce, but how would you explain that to listeners that are, like me, very impressed with your ability to do that?
I would say this is more of an operational question that we have in place. So definitely the big props to the operations team who are diligently processing all the incoming requests on the tokens that the community has been submitting. So we rely a lot on that end. The other one is that for the whole team members in CoinGecko, we are also very much infused in the whole crypto space. So whenever we go around mingling and we saw like potential project that people want to hear about and know and get all this information, we try to quickly index it as much as possible and get all the information that is needed accurately so that other people can have access to it as well. Same is true for projects that we work with closely. They begin tell us that they want to prepare this project for live, they'll submit the form, and then we try to capture all this information. So I would say there's not much of a secret sauce. It's more like diligently trying to index and aggregate and source for all the information to be added to the website.
Well, it is secret sauce because even sometimes, the coins that you list are fairly obscure. And so obviously you guys are doing something really incredible and you have your ear, as it were, close to the ground. Another thing that I would say is a really strong capability of CoinGecko is in terms of web traffic and users, based on the bootstrapping and the independence, you are hitting the ball a lot further than maybe the size would allow in terms of the competitors in the space. You guys get a lot of market share. What's the explanation behind that?
I would say that there could be many reasons why this has happened, and I'm glad that it really showed for itself. But I think some of the things that we used to do in the earlier days was, as I mentioned, like when the market is niche, I think it's much easier to get your product to the front. So I think in the early years in 2014, 2015, when I was browsing around all the crypto websites, I realized that a lot of the content are in English. And it has always been very American-centric. So all the prices you see are all in US dollars. And coming from Asia, I saw that there are interests in Asia, there are interests in Europe and whatnot, but why is all the content only in English? So we started off by translating all of our website into like more than 12 different languages and price all the assets across different currency in Japanese yen, Korean won, Singapore dollars, and so on. And back in, I think, 2017, 2018, people were coming to the space and they were looking for all these cryptocurrencies in the language that they're comfortable with, in the currency that they're comfortable with. And that also allowed us to get initial group of user base to come into the site, even though we are player number like 3, 4, or 5 at the time. So I think that like got us an initial audience. And then later on, it's more sort of like just keep iterating and building the product, right? So we already have an initial audience that are using us. We basically just keep asking them like, what do you want to see on our website? What is it that the biggest pain point that you see? So we're just iterating with new features. I guess like in a way that we try to innovate as much as we can with regard to data aggregation. So first one is back then all the exchanges were sort of like ranked just based solely on volume, trading volume. As you know, in the crypto space, there's a lot of manipulation and wash trading that's going on. So we tried to innovate this by introducing a score. We call it Trust Score, which is a blended formula that includes not just the trading volume, but we look at the order book depth, we look at the trading frequency and other aspect of it to really rank the exchanges to help user find the exchange that gives them the best liquidity for the pair that they want to trade. We get complaints from traders that they're going to the number one exchange, but when they try to buy and sell a given coin, they're getting hit by 20% slippage. So what this means is that the order book is thin, it's not real, but the volume is jacked up somehow, in some way, right? So that was like the key point they wanted to stop at the time. And we did it, and people liked the ranking, and then we continue to iterate on that. Then moving on from there is also like the DeFi thing, right? We saw that there is, we believe in DeFi back in 2018, 2019, and we think that this space, people want to get all the information that is needed as well. They tell us that they want that. So we started integrating with data from Uniswap, Curve, Balancer, using the graph as well at the time. But that has also allowed us to expand our reach to cover all the DeFi tokens that people are interested in. And that in turn also allow us to get a group of users to come in. So I think it's a lot of all this, product iteration that we have done, I would say, and we hope that people would like to use all these features and are really happy to see people, making use of it and getting the information that they want out of it.
Well, as you mentioned, TM, we're speaking today because, I run this niche podcast for the Graph audience, and many listeners wanted to hear from you, largely because of this post you had last year, which we'll get to in a minute. Before we move on to some discussion about the Graph, Are there any upcoming announcements or updates at CoinGecko that you'd like to share with listeners?
Yeah, so I think the upcoming update that I would like to share is that we are doing a conference. So there is going to be a NFT conference that we're hosting. We actually planned to do a conference for the longest time already, but we finally had the chance to do so. But because of the pandemic, we wanted to make it virtual so that everyone can have access to it. So that is definitely coming. And we have worked on How to DeFi 1 and 2, which is a book for beginners to get started with DeFi. So if you know anyone who is new and wanting to learn about DeFi, you could share them the book around. So I think these are the things that we're actively working on. Other than that, if you go to the website, you will see like new stuff gets added every week or every now and then. Basically, we're just iterating the product back and forth because also in the past couple of months, the market is crazy and we've added a lot of technical debt and we're just trying our best to, clean up the debt and also streamline the operations to make sure that we can scale when the next bull market comes as well.
And I'll put links in the listener notes for listeners that want to attend the NFT conference being hosted by CoinGecko, or if you want access to the book, or if you just want to go on and get access to all the resources available to visit coingecko.com. So, TM, let's shift a little bit of our discussion towards the graph. And maybe to start the discussion, the reason why I reached out to you and so many listeners wanted me to is in July of 2020, you did a really nice Twitter post on the graph, really talking about some of its value and its core infrastructure in the crypto space. What can you tell us about that Twitter post and what you were thinking at the time?
So when I wrote that, I was just trying to think about how we have leveraged the graph to do what we have done in CoinGecko. So I think at the time in 2020, we have aggregated almost all the DeFi products in the Ethereum space. This is before L2 and whatnot became like huge, right? So was really surprised to see all the APIs and all the subgraph that has been written by the community to be up and running on the graph and allows us to plug in easily and get all the information that is needed to integrate on CoinGecko. And I'm just trying to think in terms of the perspective of the other developers as well, right? So the experience was really nice, right? Like when we first got into DeFi, a lot of the projects were telling us that, all my data is on the chain, right? Just go and fetch it yourself, right? But I think for ourselves, while I'm interested in the DeFi, but I'm not really that deep into Ethereum at the time. This is about 2018. For me to really easily understand events and also finding the best way to get all the transactions and also index them in a way that works and scale. So when I saw like the graph has an interface that any web developer can just work on it. Like if I just get a web developer who hasn't even worked with crypto at all, they come in, they just plug into some of the subgraph using GraphQL, they can get a web app up and running instantly. So I thought that was like a real game changer because it really opens up all the use cases for developers to come in to just build something on top of it and see things happening. Kind of like how we did the API with CoinGecko as well. We just provided a market data API that is accessible for everyone, and then you start to see all kinds of apps being built on top of it. So like that's the first one. Second one is regards to the breadth of all the subgraphs that are out there, and the fact that the graph has plans to sort of like decentralize this. So I think when you look at the data space right now in the crypto side, you have your raw data that is decentralized, but then it's very difficult to work with. But then all the index data run by centralized entity, which kind of work, gets the job done, but it doesn't work for certain purposes. Like say you want to build a truly decentralized app, like a truly dApp, right? You can't do that. But once the infrastructure for the graph is in place where the nodes are all around, the indexes are all around, then you could potentially build something that is, in a way unstoppable and will just keep running as long as the network is going. So I saw that was like a really great idea, and also the setup makes sense. And that is probably the reason what got into my head at the time. And most particularly is how the adoption will be really, really, how momentum will really come in for the adoption for any web developers to just come in and build stuff on top of it.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that the community at the graph is really excited about is, similar to, as you said earlier, Bitcoin lowered the barrier for people to do international payment and exchange. The graph really lowers the barrier for dApps to enter the space and create new and innovative offerings. How does CoinGecko use the graph? You've referenced it a couple times, but can you give a little more detail on how you guys are using it?
Yeah, so like back in 2019, I suppose we get a lot of requests that they want to see Uniswap data on CoinGecko, and as mentioned at the time, like figuring out how to index all the Uniswap data properly and at scale wasn't something that we are focused on. Like we built all the modules and everything to index centralized exchange, but DeFi was relatively new at the time. So there were a couple of solutions shared to us, and then one of them was the graph. So had some time to take a look at what the graph really is, how it works. And it was, the interface is nice, the playground is easy to use. So we just started off by integrating Uniswap data. So we got like Uniswap V2, eventually the market data, all the tokens that are trading over there coming in. And then later on, new decks were launched like Balancer, Curve, and then all the copies that came in after that were all plugged into the graph as well. And it makes it really easy for us to just, get a project to just follow like, say, a standard like Uniswap V2's subgraph, and then our integration would just work seamlessly. So almost like I would say 80% or so of our DEX integration on CoinGecko is powered by the graph to some extent.
TM, is someone like yourself that has such an incredible perspective of the whole space, the whole crypto space, what's your opinion about how important a solution like the graph is in order for the space to kind of reach its full potential and deliver on a fully decentralized Web3?
Yeah, so I think the data side of things is a space that people aren't really paying too much attention to. And I think it's a really important one. There's probably the graph and a couple of other players that are focusing on this. And I think everyone is doing a pretty good job so far in terms of the ethos of trying to make it as accessible as possible to everyone and having a decentralized mindset as well as this space grow into a multi-chain environment, and also trying to make this more like a protocol and a network that everyone can take advantage of, regardless of where you're at. And the graph, I mean, the network has been launched for maybe close to a year or maybe more than half a year. And things seems to be moving along, like the tokenomics, trying to get subgraph developers to come in, and also the fact that the graph has adopted a multi-chain strategy. It's not just about Ethereum, right? It's about all the L2s, all the side chains, all the EVM-based chains as well. So I think it's definitely well on its way. Like even for us as a user ourselves, we've been closely following how it works for us to integrate on our side. And it hasn't really changed too much as well in terms of the difficulty for us. Yeah, so I think all in all, the direction seems to be on its way.
Do you think there's something you could say in terms of advice to developers who are thinking about entering into the space or leaving Web 2, how the graph might be a tool or a resource for them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's valid. So what I would say is that for all developers who are out there, as long as you have experience in building front ends or building web apps, and if you're looking to get into the crypto space to build something, like if you integrate your app using the graph, it's no different than just building another like web app that you are used to, right? I think it gets really, really daunting in the past when you have to understand what's a Ethereum event, how to make contract calls, how to connect to a RPC node to get the data that you want. And those data are not like aggregated in a way that is easy to work with. But now, all this data is being indexed and being aggregated by the network on the graph. So any developer can just come in, build a typical standard front-end web app. If you want some data from exchange, you have it. You want some data from some DAOs or any other dApps, you can just easily plug it in via an API. And then there you go. You can then combine all this different data and create something new. So I think this was the promise of Web 2.0 as well. Back then, where there's this thing called mashups that allows you to integrate APIs from different services to create new experience. The Pickle API with Photograph, combining that with some other social media data as well, and then you get something new out of it. So I think we are seeing that promise coming in here because data is so easily accessible to everyone, and you can then create new experiences that might become potentially new business in the space that helps improve the infrastructure as well.
CoinGecko also tracks community growth and the efforts as well of different crypto. What's the kind of idea you're seeing as it relates to the graphs community?
Yeah, I would say that this community tracking was something that, as I mentioned, we used to do it when we were starting out. But then as the market changes, like no two cryptocurrency or tokens are the same anymore. That it's very hard to just say that, okay, you have token A and token B, they are the same. So now you can look at the community side of things, right? Because they are so different, right? The way that's been issued and the way it's been done. So that's something that we have. So, the community tracking part has been not exactly the most accurate thing that you can look at in terms of numbers. But if you look at community by itself, then definitely it's different, right? So you got like some tokens that are focused on just memes. So those kind of audience are, it's a different kind of audience. Like it may appeal to certain kind of marketing brands or what have you. And you look at the graph side of things, is more like people who understands the value of good quality data and how to scale indexing data across different chains. It's more developer centric. It is a much more niche group. It appeals to probably like infrastructure companies as a brand for marketing and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say that because the space has grown so wide and open, every token has its own sub niche of group and sub interest group that appeals to them. And I think it comes to a point that it's almost something for everyone in the space. Like no matter what you're interested in, as long as you're interested in crypto, you will definitely find something that appeals to you. Compared to like 3 years ago, if I'm interested in data, my choices are very, very limited to a very small number of projects. But now I have like from oracles to data aggregation at the infrastructure level and all the way to data for NFTs as well if you want to. So there's just something for everyone right now for the community, and it's definitely a much better time to be involved in crypto because there's just so many support group and people just brainstorming ideas with you.
Do you think because the graph is infrastructure and it's relatively new into the marketplace, do you think it's neglected? Do you think this is one of those projects that maybe because it's more infrastructure data driven that it gets overlooked?
Yeah, I guess it gets overlooked because the market in crypto also moves in narrative, and narrative changes in cycles as well. And there hasn't been a time where I see data as a strong narrative yet. Maybe there will be a point in time where people start realizing that data is the one that powers the entire space and all the value that accrues to it. So that will probably be when everyone will be looking at projects in the graph. So I guess if you look at it fundamentally, it's really doing a lot, right? Like it's powering most of the dApps out there, it's helping researchers getting access to data, building the infrastructure view as well. So it's more of a short-term thing. Like if you really want to look at, the narrative changes from time to time, right? So that's not something that people want to be so attached to. Like as long as the product is doing well, like in terms of adoption and getting people to actually use it because it solves a problem for them, then over time, I think the fundamental will tell for itself. A good analogy for this is like Amazon Web Services, right? Like for the longest time, it has been neglected as a cheap way to host your service, which is not really the right mindset, right? But people just like to say that, yeah, it's very easy to start a company today because you can just put all your instances on Amazon Web Services and it works. But then you look at the amount of money that they make from all this infrastructure service, it's a lot, right? I think it's more than a huge percentage of the whole Amazon revenue. The same is true for data play in the crypto space, right? Maybe sooner or later, people will realize that it is so easy to start a dApp. It is so easy to start an app in the crypto space that I just plug in a few different data points and I can start a business around crypto, right? So I think that is exciting when it does happen, and the value accrual for all parties will be realized then.
Are you optimistic about the future of the graph?
Yeah, I'm seeing like based on the execution so far with multi-chain environment, with the adoption that developers understand that what they can get from the graph, there is definitely good momentum there. The community is also pretty active as well. So definitely there's going to be a place for the graph to be powering the space.
TM, in your opinion then, what's the next big thing that will happen in the crypto space? The next big milepost for the future of crypto?
Yeah, I certainly don't have a crystal ball, that's for sure, because the space changes so quickly and sometimes it just catches you off guard. I think the area that is not being paid enough attention and also will be like the area that brings in new people into the space will be definitely games. So crypto games has been around since 2017. There were a bunch of experiments, some people trying things out, but happy to see that real traction actually happened sometime last year and especially this year with Axie Infinity. Like people start to understand like how games fit into the whole crypto model. And then gamification of the whole crypto experience is also like something that people are resonating with. Like you have your typical DeFi activity, right? Yield farming or collecting your yields and putting your yield to work. Some people are creating a gamification experience on top of that in an interactive way or non-interactive way. So game itself seems to be something that existing projects or new projects might come in to bring people into the space. And I think till today, even though we saw an explosion in the last few months or so, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like there's more should be coming. And this builds up on top of the NFT side of things. Right? People are buying NFTs for the social experience, for bragging rights, or even because they just like to collect all these NFTs. But once these NFTs allows you to do certain kind of things, like in a game setting or in a virtual world, that would in then create more utility for the NFTs and create new economic model as well. Like you could use this NFT to collateralize for loans. You could lend it out to someone to earn a yield. So I think there's a lot of possibility on that front. And then lastly, I would end with like say virtual assets, virtual lands, right? This is also something that has been around for so long, but people are not paying attention to virtual real estate. The early version of virtual real estate seems very skeuomorphism, like you're just taking existing physical land title and then turn it into a virtual land title. So that's why sometimes you go to some virtual land, you see like empty plots of land because these people are just buying it to speculate and flip it. Same is true, like if you go to a newly developed town, sometimes you see like empty plots of land, with future development and stuff like that. But I think that's where the initial kickoff happened. But as the space mature, people are just trying to figure out like how they can make virtual land useful, right? Like perhaps this land will have some natural resources in the form of DeFi yields and what have you, and people will go there and interact and do certain things and then collect this yield and then move on to another land, and then all this land will somehow have value being accrued around it. So this builds up on top of the game aspect of it, right? So I think these are two areas that has been around for a while, but hasn't gotten the traction that it deserves. Maybe time will only tell that people will understand this, and also with the proper infrastructure that people will be able to make good use of it. But yeah, it's just a little bit of a long shot, but that's how I'm seeing it. Yeah.
Well, Tim, you've been so generous with your time and providing such a wonderful overview of the crypto space and what you're doing at CoinGecko. If people are interested in learning more about you or following your work, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, myself, I'm on Twitter at TMLee. So I am just there, like just tweeting whenever I'm free, and I spend most of my time over there. But other than that, you can always follow our work at CoinGecko. So we are on all social channels. Otherwise, just check out our website. You can see what we've been doing, or the posts that we have been posting as well. So yeah, I think that's the best way to keep up with us.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast.